we're going to start very, very quickly, but I do also want to extend personal thanks to my very good friend Roma, who is here not only as a guest but co-hosting tonight. And through her job and her work, she's got so many amazing, interesting stories to share with us. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being here. So for those of you who don't know, the travel community at the Conduit is a new community. And when we set it up, I wanted to sort of come at it with a slightly different lens. So obviously, sustainable travel, we think about the planet and carbon emissions, but I also wanted to propose that we have discussions about human connection and empathy and educating ourselves and connecting with people from other lands. Because I have to ask you the question, if we don't travel, what is the impact? We've got political nonsense happening in the world. Women's rights are going backwards fast. There's oppression everywhere. And I think at the same time as well, at a time when we've got a global economic crisis, people are traveling less and we're relying on our social media and journalism and etc. What are we reading, and do we really know the truth of other lands? So tonight, we're talking about how to travel meaningfully, our definition of. We're not saying it's prescriptive. And we're coming at this from the lens of the natural world, but also creative entrepreneurs around the world who you might not get to think about uncovering, lifting the bonnets behind the businesses where you're staying to understand other countries. So that's where we're coming at it from today. We've got a lot to cover. We hope that by the end of the session, we're going to inspire you to ask yourself some questions. What are you bringing to the table when you travel? What questions should we all be asking when we're booking to travel with our travel providers? Who are we staying with? How are we spending our money? So without further ado, and with all that in mind, I'd love to ask you, Roma, what does meaningful travel mean to you?
That's a great question, Dee. I think, first of all, it's really important to distinguish between meaningful travel and sustainable travel, right? We hear sustainability thrown around all the time, right? It's sort of lost its meaning in a way, this idea of maintaining something at a certain rate. But given the exponential impact of humans on this earth, sustainability is kind of unsustainable. So I love a good metaphor, as you know, and I think it's a bit like going into a garden. If you go in sustainably, you try to minimize your damage, but meaningfully, you zoom in on the details, you take a look at the seeds, what you can plant, what you can grow. And I think that, you know, it's about leaving that garden better off than when you first entered it. And as a storyteller,
Great metaphor.
you like metaphor?
Yes.
I think as a storyteller, I'm really passionate about seeing travel more as a story than a to-do list. You know, if you think of any good book that you read, it has curiosity, it has empathy, it stirs some kind of emotional connection, and it kind of opens you up to a new way of seeing the world. And that's exactly what travel should be doing. It should be resonating with that great quote that destination is no longer a place, but it's a new way of seeing things.
I love that answer. That's fantastic. And I agree with you about the books as well. And being an author, we're going to get, I've asked Roma if she would kindly read from one of her latest books to sort of really inspire you with that. But before we sort of get on to these kind of qualitative aspects, have you got any tips about how we as travellers can pop around the world and, you know, think about leaving a positive impact?
Absolutely. So as I said, I love a metaphor. So I kind of bear in mind this compass in my head for meaningful travel, which is the seek compass. So curiosity, empathy, ecosystem, and kindness. So curiosity, the first dial, and if you're tuned to these 4 dials, you're kind of on the right track. Curiosity is just about following what makes you curious. You know, what's that thing that ignites that childlike exhilaration in you? You know, what sparks that spirit of discovery? If you love cheese, go on a cheese adventure. If you like butterflies, seek out the winged wonders. It's so important. I think a big part of doing this is going on a flow day when you travel. So don't have a plan, drop your schedules and just wander. You know, because it's on those kind of moments that you find the beauty in between, right? You notice the wildflowers growing on the side of the road, and you notice the eccentric doorknobs of a place or the street art, and that's the lifeblood of a place, right? And then the second dial is empathy. So it's remembering that when you travel, you're a guest, not just a consumer. So it's about kind of being a sponge, soaking up the environment when you go there. And a big part of that is talking to locals. Who knows a place better than a local? So, local knowledge is local treasure. Third one, ecosystem, I'd say is important to me because I'm a complete nature nerd. I adore being in nature. And I think if you spend time in the natural world ecosystem of a place, it's a great way to see the bigger picture, because not just seeing kind of the iconic wildlife, but, the pollinators, the charismatic bugs and beetles, the sound of birds outside your window. When you see all these kind of fragile and interconnected pieces of an ecosystem, you remember that we're part of a global ecosystem, and that helps to break down boundaries. And in a general sense as well, if you visit any property or project, ask how it impacts a local ecosystem. Are they employing locals? Are they helping to create wild spaces for animals? Is them being there having a positive impact, or are they just slurping up the resources and taking it elsewhere? And then the final one is kindness, which I think is the most underrated quality, and it has the most powerful ripple effects. So if you think when you're walking down the street and you smile at a stranger, which obviously not very common in London, but it has such a powerful impact. That smile can then spread onto someone else, and you've created this chain of warmth as you go. And I think we need to have that mentality when we travel, be kind to locals, pick projects that care about local communities, and, give back to wildlife after you've left it. Sustainability sustains, but kindness emanates.
I completely agree. So what would you suggest we do if we're going somewhere and that language is a barrier? How do we engage them?
Wow. I think on the front, there's so many sort of little text apps and things we can use in the digital world now to help us. And I think just learning a few key phrases to show the effort and the willingness is key. But I think there's some language beyond words, to be honest. I remember having this great encounter actually in Sri Lanka with this lovely lady who was working in a paddy field, and she had the most beautiful smile, and I wanted to engage with her, and I did not speak the language. And we went up and we were sloshing around in the mud, looking at dragonflies, and she was showing me what she was doing. And there's so much that comes through in kind of body language and warmth and eye contact. So I don't think words need to be a barrier to necessarily engaging with someone meaningfully. So learn a few phrases, but rely on kind of human charisma and connection beyond it.
I agree with that. I think you can have a conversation with your body language, can't you? And also we have so many people around the world who are interpreters as well. Often we travel with guides who are interpreting for us, but I do think it's really important when you're speaking to someone through an interpreter that you actually have that eye contact with someone. And so the interpreter's sort of being the voice behind you, as it were. But I love those 4 tips. So seek, curiosity, empathy, ecosystem and kindness. I wouldn't add much more to that, actually. I love the curiosity aspect. I think if you don't travel with curiosity, then you're not slowing yourself down, and you're not asking questions, you're not lifting the bonnet, as we said. The only thing that I would like to add is that traveling as if you are part of a global community. So when you're traveling, as opposed to thinking of yourself as a tourist and sort of being behind a camera or behind a sheet of glass, what would the difference in your body language and the way you travel be if you thought of yourself as part of a community and you were bringing something to the table? Cultural exchange for me is a big thing in this day and age. We really should be looking to preserve the traditions and the beliefs of other cultures. Of course, the world is progressing at such a huge rate, but that exchange and preservation piece, I think, is really important. When I was growing up at school, I wasn't very interested in history or geography, I'm afraid. So it's only in recent years that I've become much more interested. And what captivates me is a book that's written about the history of a land, but a fictional piece. So you can empathise with the characters. The books that you've written, which we will be, here we are, Seek the Singing Fish. We're going to be pointing at that one quite a lot. But I think, I have learned so much through your writing. There's a fantastic writer called Abraham Verghese. I don't know if anyone has read The Covenant of Water, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. You can learn about the history of these lands, but also where they are in the current day. And I think that's quite an important piece, to turn up to somewhere, even if it's Italy or France, somewhere that we've been 100 times before. Do we actually know the history of that region, how it's developed, where the economy has come from, what the creatives are doing in that space? So that's the only thing I would really add to that. Because you're right, I believe that those sort of special moments of slowing down and something happens unexpectedly, a conversation, or you discover something. And those are the travel tales, right? When you come home and you're telling your friends and family about some great trip you've just had, you might talk about the fantastic place that you stayed, the beautiful landscape. But how many of you have actually said, do you know what, I had this cracking conversation with someone and I learned X, Y, Z, and it was absolutely off the chart, and it was around the back of this little alley and I found this stop and I stopped for coffee and I ended up having this conversation. So I think those are really special moments. Now, you are a travel presenter, you work for the BBC, you're writing and you've been around the world. Recently you went to Iceland. I'd love you to share your story with the group about what you discovered there.
I don't know if anyone here has been to Iceland, but it's just like another planet, isn't it? It's surreal going there. And I went out with the BBC travel show, and the idea was to go to the far north of the island. So we were going to the edge of the Arctic Circle, where there's not many people there. And most people flock to kind of Reykjavik in the south. But in the north, you've got kind of roaring waterfalls, you've got kind of bubbling mud pots, you've got the hot springs under the stars, and it's all there, but much closer together. And there's barely a soul in sight. And I uncovered so many, as you were saying, fascinating local stories and conversations. I met this woman who was really passionate about Viking history. And so she set up this whole VR Viking experience where you kind of battle as a Viking, which was just incredible, you know. And it's quite enlightening because I thought I'd be picking up like an epic battle axe, but most of the time you're actually just throwing rocks. It was
How did that work?
You go into this kind of like sort of simulator, you put on the equipment and you're holding these kind of sticks and you look like an absolute nutter when anyone sees you beyond it. But in the moment, you're there, you know, you're smelling the soil and you're hearing the birds and the rumble of battle. But it was incredible. And there's another one as well. I saw this extreme knitter in Iceland who takes people out into the rugged landscapes to get inspiration to design these sweaters. I learned I was a terrible knitter. That was one of the lessons. But you learn about like the history of the craft. I thought it was just a cozy pastime, but it's actually about survival, you know, and you hear the kind of like the gravitas behind why they're doing it. And then my favorite, of course, because of the nature, was the whale watching. So we headed to Husavik, which is one of the whale watching hotspots in Europe. And obviously it's spectacular to see a whale at all. And I did cry, of course. But there's a really interesting psychological story there, because the fishermen and boats that are going out to tour guide and marvel at the whales are the same boats and people who were going out to slaughter them before. As you see this kind of shift of people valuing whales as living treasure of the sea. And it's just absolutely fascinating. And that's what you learn, you know, it's not about going to the Instagram hotspots, it's about the curiosity of local context and slowing down to appreciate it.
And what's interesting about that fisherman story as well, what I love about that, is giving a new role to people who've relied for so long on fishing, but it's not been done in a sustainable way, and we're trying to find new ways of keeping our seas kind of flourishing. Yeah. But to find a way of giving them a new livelihood, and that's regenerative travel, isn't it? And that's something that we should be really thinking about, how we can give opportunities. Yeah. But can you share the story about the bread?
The bread. Yes. Oh. So they we was going to try some geothermal bread in Iceland, which is incredible. So they bake it in the ground using the kind of volcanic heat, and when it comes out, it looks like cake. And it is absolutely delicious. But it's kind of a lesson in patience. You know, these locals, these families have been doing that for generations. And this is kind of whole process. They get together, they knead the bread, they bury the bread, and they all come out together with the kids to lift it from the earth. And it's this kind of like dragon's breath wafting off it. It's just absolutely delicious. You know, I wish we could do it here, but you know.
So that's part of everyday life. That's not a tourist.
So not absolutely everyone.
Not for the tourists.
But again, you know, it's a wonderful thing, an unusual thing to have taken away. And again, it's about slowing down, I think, is the key. You know, slowing down the pace of life, slowing down to appreciate and kind of cook on nature's rhythm. And actually slowing down is one of my biggest themes when I travel. One of my favorite stories is I was tracking wolves in the Italian mountains, and I was with this really professional hiking group. It was like 9 hours a day. They were marching forward to find these wolves. And I was dawdling around in the back. I was always the last. I was looking at the wildflowers and, you know, picking up bugs. And I was the only one who saw the wolves because I was dawdling looking at grasshoppers. I looked up and I saw this pack come out of the forest, and it was just magic. And I felt like that was a lesson because, you know, dawdling leads to magic.
So all the rest of the group just missed out on that.
They were too focused on the destination and not the journey.
Oh, that's interesting. That's so true of all of us, isn't it? Whereabouts in Italy was that?
That was in the Apennines, in the mountain range. Yeah, there's bears there as well. We didn't see any bears that time, but the wolves. My goodness. Blistering cold though as well. So all your senses are heightened.
Yeah. It's what's interesting about both those stories is that both of those locations you've just talked about, you've gone to places that are off the beaten track and doing things that those countries are not necessarily known for. Mm-hmm. Have you noticed anything else in your travels? Is that a common theme? Is that what you were looking for when you travel around the world? And how do you uncover these things?
God, I mean, it's often about asking around, finding a local contact and finding out what do they think is interesting about the country? What do I need to see while I'm here? It's normally those little side conversations that you'll have will lead you to that gold. But I do think going off the beaten track, first of all, I mean, it's better for the planet and you're not sort of sitting in a queue. I mean, you look at these safari parks nowadays and people are just sort of sitting in a queue, a traffic jam of jeeps, and they're sort of huddled near the elephant. And it kind of defeats the point, doesn't it, of what nature's about and viewing things at a distance with respect. And I think, it kind of frustrates me sometimes when you get these kind of stereotype holidays, which will go to exactly the same destination every time. Like I see at the moment these safari videos. Have you guys seen where there's like a safari truck and the leopard and the lion sort of jump on the truck, and it's this kind of really thrilling moment? But it's so unhealthy, the tourism. Like it's really unnatural because those animals have been habituated to associate the jeep with food. If they hurt anyone, it's the animal that's going to pay the price, and it distorts the entire point of doing a safari. You're there to learn about an animal in its habitat, as opposed to kind of turning an animal into an entertainment prop. And the problem is Instagram then exacerbates the problem because, people see that experience, they crave it for themselves. Tour operators feel this pressure to deliver on it. And then you've got this kind of vicious cycle. And you've got to ask yourself, what is a meaningful safari experience? Is it getting as close a selfie as possible with an animal? Or is it, learning patience and respect for a wild creature and, not getting them to perform, but ultimately learning how to belong in the wild without, disturbing it?
That's one of the problems, I think, with some of the ways that holidays or travel is marketed to us. There are the hooks. Safari is obviously one, wellness is another. But coming back to safari, we'll come on to wellness in a second. But I don't know how many of you saw who are in the travel community at the Conduit today. I shared it. I was shown an Instagram post about the Marriott just last week have opened up a Ritz-Carlton in the Masai Mara in Kenya, along one of the migration routes, right? Mm-hmm. What are your obvious thoughts on that? But I mean, how does that kind of thing happen?
This is what I mean. And this is what the problem, with that level of power and these big chains, they come in and they just disregard, centuries, thousands of years of these routes that animals have carved out. And, what good is it to put a luxury estate in a swimming pool so that people can watch the destruction? It's bizarre. But again, the fact that these videos are coming out and viralizing it, this is the great side of the digital world, right? We can hold them to account because ultimately it's just horrific that people think they can get away with this because of sheer gravitas of power and money. But yeah,
I definitely think we need to hold people to account and just get them to ask those questions. If you haven't seen the video, and we can share it with you, one of the local tribal chiefs had apparently tried to, I think, stop the opening. They tried to stop the opening and they failed. But he's actually taken them to court in October. And he's challenging them to show their licenses and certificates to say, how did this happen? But it's something that I'm a designer and I have a property in Sri Lanka. I'll sort of share a bit about that with you later. But one of the other things that I think is really interesting is the way travel is marketed to us, apart from these kind of hook type holidays, is the hotel and how beautiful it is. And there is a lot of power held in the hands of travel companies, but also travel destinations and operators. And I think that's why it's really important. The meaningful travel piece, I think we both agree, we've spoken about this at length, is to ask the people who you're staying with, what are you doing in the local community? And are you making sure that if you're offering safaris, if you're offering wellness holidays, that kind of thing, how is it done? Is it regenerative? Is money staying in the country? Are we including the locals? Wellness is something I want to touch on because the yoga retreat. Now we do have a yoga shala, and I'm seeing it all around, and it's interesting talking about Sri Lanka. We're actually going to be using Sri Lanka as a case study shortly, and I'll tell you why. But the rise of wellness, we're told about breathing techniques, how to sleep, digital detoxes, what to eat, everything. And these are all hooks for travel. And recently, there was a spate about a year ago of Sri Lanka being marketed as the next Bali. And it's interesting, just going back to that piece that we were talking about at the beginning in terms of media, journalism, social media. Why does a country have to be like somewhere else? Mm-hmm. You know, it's like a great film or a great series can be produced, and someone will go and produce another film. They'll say, it's the next Ocean's 11. Well, no, it's not actually. So there's this sort of comparative thing that we seem to be sort of trying to reduce ourselves into these lists. It's just something I just wanted to throw in. What have you noticed anything during your travels about the wellness scene?
Well, I think, Bali, for example, it's kind of being decimated a bit. I think a lot of people are now put off from going to Bali altogether because it's become this kind of generic, I'm going to go and sit beneath the tree and, all of this. And it's not done in a respectful way. I see so many people living there and indigenous communities who are furious about it because hotels are coming in, they're not giving back to the local community. They have no regard for what's going on. They're cutting off water supplies to local villages there. And it's just, it's defeating the whole point, of connecting with the earth and getting back into balance, and it's throwing everything off balance. So it seems sort of bizarre to be doing. And when you hear these things like, Sri Lanka being the new Bali, it's quite worrying because of what do we associate with Bali and travel at the moment? It's such a shame because these are incredibly beautiful countries and they get kind of locked into these stereotypes, and when one person demands it, another person wants it, and you've got this kind of, these digital nomads going there and kind of taking it over. I've seen so many videos of sort of like a natural Bali site, and it's just loads of Westerners really on their laptops, isn't it, having a chai latte. So it's a bit surreal.
That is so true. It's the avocado on toast, chai lattes, the works. But I think that's absolutely right. You've hit the nail on the head. I think that we are ripe for a big wake-up call about how to travel. And I do think that for those countries that really rely on tourism, a lot of these places, they're great hosts and they are countries that people want to travel to because you're treated kindly by the host nation because they want you to come. But I think what I'm observing is we find ourselves in this completely bizarre position where the host nation is turning itself inside out to keep the traveller happy. Mm. And the traveller, bizarrely, is coming to the host nation thinking, oh, great, they're offering us all of these things. So you end up sort of in this vicious cycle, which is why we need to take back a bit of control about what we're asking for. And that's certainly something that's been happening in Sri Lanka. Should we talk about Sri Lanka? Let's talk about Sri Lanka. So while we were putting together this talk, we thought that we would speak about Sri Lanka as a case study because not only do we know it really, really well, but actually it's a perfect example of a country that could do it right or could do it wrong. Mm. So to set a little bit of context, for those of you who don't know, Sri Lanka is an old world island. It's as old as the hills, and right from the beginning of time, it's been a trading country. So from the Africans to the Moors to the West who colonialized it, there have been so many people that have been coming through Sri Lanka, stopping off, trading, which is why it's a perfect melting pot of different influences. And people love it because it's unspoilt. And it's unspoilt because I think it was 1981. It's 1981, 1983. A 30-year civil war broke out. It was a bloody civil war. It was absolutely awful. Many Sri Lankans left and scattered around the globe. And that only ended in 2009. So where are we now? 2025. That was 14 years ago. Now, bearing in mind that 5 years of that has been given over to pandemic, political and economic turmoil. So now you have this country which relies on tourism. It's really only 10 years out of a civil war. It's coming back into the world, with social media, it's seeing what travelers want. It's on its knees economically, so people are coming and investing in the country and buying up land and building properties, some of them from the heart, some of them not so much. And so it's ripe, actually, for really getting things wrong or doing things right. And this is the perfect opportunity for us as travellers to think about this country, how we can help shape it and look at it from a more regenerative perspective.
Absolutely. And slight plug, but my travel company, Curious Fox, we're really passionate about bringing the right kind of tourism to Sri Lanka. And so some of the projects we do, it's about kind of genuinely helping local projects in a grassroots way that's going to have this wonderful impact. And one place we take people is the Sri Craft Shop and Cafe in Conduit, which is just an incredible project. You go for these beautiful homemade cooking classes and it's just mouth-watering, like it'll make your soul sing. But all of the women who are employed there, they are victims of domestic abuse or they have disabilities which prevent them from getting employment. And this isn't about pity. It's not about Westerners coming in and throwing money from their high horse. It's about, championing these women who are incredibly skilled and, providing targeted support in a localized way. Another place that is really worth a visit, which we take people to, is Tamarind Gardens. So you stay on this lovely farm by a lake, and the idea is to give you an authentic village experience. So you are getting involved with the cooking, with picking the herbs, with looking after the farm animals. And also we take you with a tour with a local to see all the different projects that the farm uplifts. So from incense making classes, women's embroidery classes, and you see this kind of mission that the farm has to bring the entire village up with it. And that's what it's all about. And then of course, Kalukanda House, which is just an absolute oasis. As soon as you enter the gates there, you are just replenished from the inside out. But it's such a great way too, to not only, escape and unwind, but to be embedded in kind of local community in an authentic way. Cooking classes, yoga classes, breath work, responsible wildlife tours. To me, kind of Kalukanda is like this magnificent tree. You go and shelter under its shade, but its roots are embedded in all things authentically local. So it's these kind of projects, it's really important that we focus on, showing Sri Lanka from the Sri Lankans' perspective a little bit more. Because I think, as we said, this new kind of colonialism coming in of your package honeymoon and surfing and beaches, that's not really Sri Lanka, It's about, letting locally led projects take the front. And that's what it needs to be.
Thank you for that. Thank you for the plug as well. That's very kind. Now, you are half Sri Lankan, aren't you? You're half Irish and half Sri Lankan. Slightly unscheduled question, but you were travelling to Sri Lanka back and forth as a youngster. Mm-hmm. What were your memories as you were growing up and you were travelling back? Because you had a very close relationship with your grandfather who taught you about nature. But I'm interested in how those roots really have fed into how you travel today.
I mean, definitely the natural world element. So obviously as a child, you're not so aware of kind of the political things as much. There's this kind of hum in the background, but my grandfather's passion for nature ignited it in me. He was just obsessed, he would be picking up crocodiles and cabaragoya and, it was infectious, that kind of passion. So I've always seen Sri Lanka as this just living laboratory of natural life. And it's always stayed with me. And that's another thing, because I think Sri Lanka's wildlife offerings tend to kind of focus around the elephants nowadays, and that's all people see. But there's so many other unusual kind of sites and biodiversity to get stuck into. And so that's always been a passion that stayed with me going back, to find kind of what's going on with the coral reefs up in the northeast. How can we present the whale migrations in a way that's kind of ethical and responsible? And so that natural world theme has stayed through the whole way. And again, my favourite memories of being there were, having ginger beers and just being still and looking at all the different colours and types of dragonflies. And that's the things you remember when you travel. It's not necessarily just going to, Lion's Rock. Although I do remember being very tired climbing up there as a child. But yeah.
Yeah, Lion's Rock is a place called Isigria in the middle of the island, and it looks like Table Mountain, and there is zero health and safety, which kind of makes it fun to climb, but it's quite tiring. And when you get to the top, it's just wow! It's just the most freeing place ever, and I hope it's never ruined. But coming back to the wildlife, so a lot of people go to Sri Lanka and look for elephant safari, which you can do. And it's fantastic, but you do need to think about who you travel with, because sadly there are some operators, and it's not through cruelty. They just want to please the visitors. And you'll end up with lots of jeeps kind of crowding around these elephants. And there are lots of people who won't do that. So it's really important to find those operators, who are... Now, there's naturists and there's naturalists, and one of them takes off their clothes and one of them find the people
and
who are looking
really passionate naturalists.
Yeah, find the ones that really want to look after the elephants. But we have got a story around the human elephant conflict in Sri Lanka. Do you want to share a bit about that?
I think that, again, this kind of encapsulates the whole thing about the balance lens. When we report Sri Lanka in the media, what story are we telling? Is it this polished perfection, or is it the authentic and interesting stories? So human-elephant conflicts, I'm sure you probably noticed that ancient elephant migration routes are clashing with villages. So villagers are then lashing out and killing the elephants, and elephants are killing humans, and it's become a problem. Now, the skewed lens, when we see the kind of clickbait headlines, are just painting the villagers as villains and how cruel to be hurting the elephants. But at the end of the day, this is their entire livelihood. You know, they depend on these crops to survive, and they can't feed their families when it's not there. But the more interesting lens, which should be reported on, is the locally led stories of success. So Sri Lankan scientists, naturalists and ecologists, probably the naturalists in there too, they are noticing some incredible behavior with elephants where they are scared of the sound of bees and the scent of citrus flowers. And so these are natural solutions that we can use to demarcate villages and help to successfully solve the problem. Now, I only learned about this because I was having some ginger beers with some of the local rangers in Udawalawa, and this is not the kind of stuff that gets reported in the media so much. They tend to love this kind of juicy clash story where you've got these kind of diametrically opposed sides locked in a zero-sum game, but there is so much going on that's working on the ground, which is locally led on the ground. And I'm sure, it raises the question, if you go to see elephants in Sri Lanka, do you just want to take a picture, or do you want to learn from a local passionate pro how elephants are actually getting on and how you can safeguard their future so your grandkids can see them too, And I think most people would be interested in the latter, but sometimes we don't think that we have that option,
Yeah. And if we just stay on the elephant theme for a while, I have heard of a local project which is in pilot phase, and I think it's going to be very successful, where someone has set up an idea, the elephant watchtowers that the farmers used to do to keep an eye on the elephants and, make sure they wouldn't come in and trample their crops. They're trying a pilot where they're going to convert one of these towers into a place that you can pay to go and sleep in under the stars. And so they become guides, the elephants. So rather than losing their livelihoods, there's a way of these farmers having a regenerative aspect to using their land to allow people to watch these migratory patterns of elephants going through.
And it's like we were saying with the whales, it's that same story, isn't it? How we can shift to a regenerative model of where people are moving from kind of hunter to guardian and seeing that, like, the value in an elephant when it's alive. When, say, this watchtowers kick off and that farmer gets a lot of money coming in from that, then all of a sudden the elephants are absolutely wonderful, aren't they? And it's going to change the mindset slowly, and that's what we need. It's moving to that mindset of awe and wonder,
So if we just talk about the tour that you did around the island with Curious Fox, how did you decide where to go, and how did you uncover? I know you've been traveling to Sri Lanka back and forth for a long time, but how do we advise people to find these gems of places that are off the beaten track and are ethically run?
Well, I mean, the best thing, as I say, is local knowledge. Is when I go out there, I do my due diligence. I ask around, and every local will have a story about something that they're quite passionate about, and they think, oh, my cousin's doing this thing that I think you should really see. And there's these weaving class that's really taking off. So it's about talking to locals and getting that insight is really, really important. And also just asking the right questions. When you go to places, it's the same thing with kind of, if you're shopping sustainably when you go to Sri Lanka or anywhere, like, you need to ask the right questions. If someone is a genuine craftsman, then they're going to be very proud to tell you that story. If they're not, then you're looking at more kind of mass market exploitation stuff going on. So when I travel, it's more about going out there, talking to a lot of locals, just spending time in country. And as I said, a lot of flow days. If a ranger mentions a project, I'll head to that village. If I go to that village, I'll have another conversation. They'll mention one nearby. Then I'll talk, are the boats willing to do tours across here? Absolutely. So it's about bit by bit building this kind of mosaic of a tour. But again, really passionate about taking people beyond just Colombo and the beaches of the south, you know, because there's so much to see there. And even, again, the safari parks, everyone goes to Yala. Like, if you've heard of Sri Lanka, most people know about Yala. And there's actually more leopards in Wilpatu, and no one goes there. You should really go there. There's the highest density of leopards there, and you'll have a more unusual and less traffic jam experience. It's about spreading out that tourism, I think. It's really, really important.
So when people are booking to go anywhere, but we are using Sri Lanka as a case study, and they're looking at Instagram and reading the papers and looking at, you know, top 10, this is where the challenge comes in, isn't it? Because not everyone has the luxury of feeling confident traveling in a foreign land. And you've got 2 weeks off and you want to create the best itinerary possible. So this is where the media piece comes in, and this is where our research piece comes in, trying to uncover these stories in the comfort of our own homes before we book our tickets and we're looking around. And so the more stories that we can share as travellers coming back, we are all influencers, every single one of them. I can't tell you how many people approach me as an influencer and say, can I come and stay at Kalukanda House for a week, please? I will just do everything and then I'll do a couple of pictures. I'm not interested. We're all influencers, and if we think of ourselves as that and we bring back these anecdotal stories and we start to flood our World Wide Web with these stories, then we'll see more of that. So I just want to
sort of remembering the stuff that works. When you see something nice and authentic and local, share it, you know, because that's how you kind of reprogram these echo chambers that we have, by sharing the good stuff. Otherwise, how else is it going to get through? And I think at the moment, obviously, there's this horrible move towards very short form content where it's sort of, you know, 6-10 second videos just to grab your attention. And which, first of all, I mean, I think it kind of undermines us a little bit, but it's about taking the time to engage with the longer form stuff and the written articles and the stuff that you like and sharing it. Because if we don't do that, how else are other people going to find it? You're going to, you know, start the wave.
Absolutely. Well, we've talked a lot about nature. Let's talk about some of the creative entrepreneurs. Yeah. During your travels, what did you uncover? Did you uncover any people who were innovating ideas and creating things that you wouldn't necessarily have heard about if you hadn't been traveling around and looking?
Yeah, I mean, Tamarind Gardens is actually a good example of that. The owners of that farm village were recommended to me from someone I met in Sri Lanka, and they told me to go and check out this farm. It's not that well known. It doesn't really have much of a presence online. But going there and hearing their story is what made me fall in love with the place. It's the most rustic place you'll stay on one of our tours. It's not particularly luxury, but it's the one that everyone remembers the most, because you'll have dinner with the people who run it and you'll hear their story about how passionate they are about bringing up this village. And they've rescued all kinds of cats and dogs, which is wonderful. They're just kind-hearted people, and spending time with them, you get the passion. You feel the heart in what they're trying to do. And that's what attracts me to a project initially. And as I said, with the rangers that I often, whenever I go on any kind of wildlife tour, I love to sit with the rangers afterwards, because they've all got a great story. If you work in nature and you're kind of immersed in that scene, there's always something that sparked it as a child. And like when you get that kind of light in someone's eyes when they talk about it, that's what's memorable. And those are the conversations that I want to have, because that leads you on to then what projects are going on now, what's quite topical here. Like even at the moment, you know, the north of Sri Lanka is now being opened up slowly to tourism, which I think is very interesting, because we need to make sure that it's done carefully, right? And especially, you know, the kind of linking tours to Trincomalee in the northeast. There's some amazing coral reef sites there where you can go and you swim with reef sharks and clownfish and turtles. But if it's not done in the right way and we kind of flood the tourists to this place, it's going to completely decimate the ecosystem there. So it's about how do we kind of, the north of Sri Lanka will be really interesting to watch, I think, over the next few years. I saw even the Sunday Times this week did a piece on it. So it's starting to get the traction.
Yeah. The wildlife up there is off the chart. There are wild horses and flamingos and, it's just all happening. I'd like to talk about the creative entrepreneurs as well. So one of the things that I discovered whilst I've been working out in Sri Lanka is the people who innovate. I'm a designer here, so I love colour, I love clothes, I love jewellery, I love architecture, all of this. And during COVID, when people couldn't travel, I was looking for stories to share. And I discovered some really interesting people. And then I scratched the surface and I found a few more people. And then they were introducing me to even more people. And there is a whole army of people, not just in Sri Lanka, but around the world. We're going to have a couple of stories from a couple of our audience members during questions. But I'm going to talk about the people I met in the world of fashion, for example. There is some I'm pointing at Becca, who's the head of our sustainable fashion community, and she's done a lot of work out in Sri Lanka. But there are some incredible people who are working with recycling materials, upcycling materials, creating fashion that really respects Sri Lankan traditional techniques like batik. But you may not hear of them if you end up in a tourist shop or on the tourist trail. There are people who are writing books and stories about the landscape, telling stories about what life was like during the war, as you have. And these are difficult stories to tell. And sometimes it's easier to tell a story, I think, and perhaps read a story in its sort of fictional form, but it creates that connection. We met photographers, women photographers. There are very, very few female safari guides in Sri Lanka. There are 3 or 4, and there are more that are being trained. So it's really interesting when you start to look at the people of an island, who's behind them, because those are the people that you can connect with, but also supporting them. Mm-hmm. That's where the money starts getting back into the community. And I also want to add, I have a bit of a bee in my bonnet about what's reported about Sri Lanka. Quite often, I mention media, etc., because when times are tough, the first thing that you're told is, don't travel, a bomb's gone off. Or when times are good, travel to this area. This is where the latest beach and latest hotel is. Now, if we can use Sri Lanka as an example, a few years ago, there was an attack, a bomb went off, and the Foreign Office closed the borders to the island. And what ended up on our front headlines was, oh my God, don't go to Sri Lanka, it's the worst thing ever. Now, it happened just after COVID. That single headline did more to damage the Sri Lankan economy for 2 years than COVID or political unrest, because people just thought, okay, I've had it. This country is unsafe. Now, the reality is that incident, as awful as it was, and I'm about to mention another incident, I'm not undermining its awfulness, but the London Bridge attack was terrible. Did people stop coming into the UK because of that attack? No. Did London open up its doors the day after? Yes. My point being that if you're sitting on the other side of a sea or a flight and you're reading these headlines, please kind of just lift the bonnet on what's going on there. And I think it's really important to talk about that.
I think especially with print journalism, you said the damage that kind of article did. We know now that print journalism is kind of a declining model, and there's incentives behind what is printed. There is interest behind everything you read, whether it's online or in print. And I think being aware of that is the first step. You know, it's being aware that you're being fed a certain story from a certain perspective and being live to that. Because as soon as you have that kind of awareness of that it's come from someone, you're able to then kind of, you know, pick it apart a little bit more sensitively. But as you said, there's a responsibility again for us to kind of, people write what they think that other people will like to read. And, you know, these dramatic stories and these clash headlines and the bomb, you know, this drama story that's been done and done time again. People have compassion fatigue, you know, people just, they're sick of seeing the bad news. And it breaks my heart that we don't see enough good news. There's a few kind of sprouts coming through in the industry, but there are so many great news stories and this slower kind of form content that doesn't get the time of day. And so if we take the time to kind of engage with those things, that's where we're going to start to see change. It's us demanding that we can kind of rewrite, reprogram the stories that we're fed. But absolutely, like the story like that, it's terrific. And I mean, I was there during the elections recently in Sri Lanka, and, you know, there was curfews there. And, you know, I saw the reports being back that, you know, it's on lockdown and no one's allowed to leave. It was absolutely fine. You know, everyone was fine. They were having dinners in the street. It was absolutely fine. But it's not what you read. And the first thing I asked about Sri Lanka is normally, is it safe to go? Of course it's safe to go. Get your bloody out. Yeah.
My mum still tells me to be careful, so that just shows how out of date she is. So can we see, again, just slightly off piece, but you're continuing your work with BBC Travel, and you're going to be travelling around the world to Colombia and all these amazing countries. So are you taking it upon yourself and with your program producers as well to start uncovering and sharing some of these stories with us.
Oh, absolutely. It's my passion to tell more local and interesting stories when I travel. I'm actually going to be going into the marine world a little bit more soon. So I'm a forest girl. My experience is not underwater. And I want to tell that story more authentically. You know, whenever I see diving videos, it's so slick and smooth and sleek. And I want to show the mix-ups. I want to show that, you know, my goggles fill with water and I don't know how to figure out the kit. And I think, you know, taking people on a real journey will be a bit more interesting. So it's about doing it in an authentic way. And as we said, you know, I'll be diving with some sharks and mantas, and those fishermen that were once hunting these creatures are now going out and being trained as tour guides. So I'm really interested in that shift. You know, I want to learn how it's changed in the minds and hearts of the people living there, because that's how we generate real change. So yeah, definitely looking to tell more local and interesting stories.
Showing us where and how to spend our money. That
Absolutely,
really good.
And the same with books as well. I mean, like I've got lots of books building, and there's one I'm just finishing, which is about human-elephant conflict. So I wanted to tell that story in an emotional way, you know, getting people to care through the eyes of a young boy who forms this remarkable bond with an elephant, which is decimating his father's crops, and, you know, how he connects to the memories of his dead mother through this elephant. And I think if we want people to pay attention to important environmental issues, we have to tell it in an emotional way. You have to pull at the heartstrings and kind of lead them into this immersive story. And that's what will wake people up. That's what will cut through the compassion fatigue, not the big headlines. It's, you know, hiding away in a book. That's the stuff that sticks and wakes you up.
Yeah, I completely agree. So you're going to do a reading for us shortly, but what else, apart from the book writing and the travel, is on your radar for the next year or so?
So for the next, I do like to take it month by month. So I'm off to South Africa this month to check out some eco safari tours. So again, I'm really passionate about reworking these kind of operations that are going on with viral safari tours. So I want to go and meet and learn about the conservation. I think people would like to meet the rangers who are working there and how they got into the practice, and doing that this month. And then I'm running some adventure group tours to Colombia, again, another country that everyone just thinks drugs and Escobar, but there's a lot more to it. And so I'm running that in November, and then Borneo in December. And then next year, we'll be looking at some creative retreats at Kalukanda House and Mexico as well. So quite a lot on the travel front, for sure. Which I love.
I love the fact that you're choosing these places that were going to change the narratives and really update the stories that some of us might have in our heads if we haven't travelled to them.
Absolutely.
I actually recently heard that Colombia is super safe.
Yes, it is.
Yes. Yeah, it's not necessarily what we're told. Yeah. But this is, yeah, so I look forward to these updated narratives.
Mm-hmm.
But before you do your reading, shall we share a little bit more about what you can do in Sri Lanka at Kalukanda House as well? I just want to, Well, I just want to give you an example, and I'm not the only person doing this, but I'm just going to use my business as an example. I'm new to hospitality. I'm a designer. I am a British Sri Lankan, and it's really because I've not come through the conventional hospitality route. I've just seen a few things that I don't resonate with. That I've started a few initiatives myself. Like I said, during COVID, I noticed that there was a real lack of information about the people of Sri Lanka. So I started to discover these people, and I set up an initiative called Hera Project X. And what that is about is shining a light on creative female entrepreneurs. And we had an event a couple of years ago, and we had photographers and authors and fashion designers and artists, and like I said, these rangers who came and gave talks. And now, if you come to Kalukanda House, but also a number of other places around the island, if you're interested, you can meet these people whilst you're also visiting the beaches, learning about the food and the cookery. And I see it as my job as a hotel owner, to be a portal to the traveller into the community and into the way you will discover Sri Lanka. And there are many people who are sort of behaving in this way. We're also linked, I'm going to do a little plug now, we're also linked very strongly to a charity called Their Future Today. I discovered them in 2019. I joined the board of trustees. I'm now chair of trustees, and it was actually set up by someone else. She's not here tonight, unfortunately, in 2004, post-tsunami. And what they do is they're all about keeping families together and alleviating poverty. Now, the founders have just joined the Conduit and are based out of the Conduit. So a little plug for an event we're having on the 1st of November. If anyone is interested, we'll be sharing some details about that. We'd love you to come along and support. But I do believe that as a hospitality owner, we should be looking to stay at places where people are working with the community, but also trying to entice you to come and stay with us in order to then push you out of the door and get you into the communities. So, and there's a few of us around who are doing that.
It's an exciting few months ahead.
But I would like you to read from your book, please. Can you set the tone on what it's about? A couple of passages. This is fantastic. If you haven't read this book, please buy it. There are some copies at the back of the room.
That's a very nice plug. So I'll read you a couple of passages, one of which is kind of, we won't go too graphic. It is a dark book, fundamentally about hope in darkness and a young girl who finds refuge in the natural world and endures kind of untold horrors through this kind of mechanism she's built in her head with nature. So I'll read you the first passage.
Do you want to hold this for you?
Yeah.
Do you need to?
That's all right. Okay.
What does this to be about?
Yeah, so this one is kind of, you'll see the reference here to the kind of the war that's going on in the backdrops. This is as the civil war is kind of simmering and starting to build in the country, and she's finding ways to escape it. I often zoned out simply staring at the surface of the lagoon, entranced by the branches and clouds reflected in the ripples. It's breathtaking to see earth, sky and water fused all together like that, a mirror of everything that is, was and will be. Problem was, the curfews would always shake me from my cocoon and force me back to reality. The war was a possessive kind of monster, and I always knew when something atrocious had happened around town. I heard the whispers rush through the branches and saw the leaves trembling with what they'd heard. The trunks witnessed, creased, and ached. And beneath my soles, I could hear the hot panic murmurs rumbling beneath the chattering roots. Sometimes it even sounded like the air itself was screaming, swelling with the weight of some terrible thing, desperate to escape what it had seen. Okay, so that was a little bit about kind of how she interprets what's going on through the natural world.
And she's a young girl, isn't she?
She's a very young girl who grows up through the conflict. I had another one. So this one's a little bit more kind of what we were saying about being present and connecting to a place and slowing down a little bit. It was easier to breathe beneath that tree, like her leaves were inhaling and sharing the burden of my pain, the roots soothing my aching body. I gripped her beneath my palms, feeling how deep she ran into the earth, reassured that the wind could move her branches all it wanted, but it would never shake her roots. I listened to her creaking limbs and traced her bark beneath my fingertips, admiring the scars worn so gracefully in the quiet wash of moonlight. I loved sheltering under my oak when it rained. I inhaled the downpour, letting it cleanse and stroke me drip by drip. It felt like I was part of that rain, like the droplets were plunging into the ocean inside my own skin. Back by my lagoon, I'd always wondered what a downpour felt like to the wrasse and killifish swimming near the surface. Given fish are about the same density as water, the vibrations most likely pass right through them. Sitting beneath the oak, full of the pouring sky, I was starting to understand the feeling. Yeah, so
I honestly urge you to read the book, because the book is set during the Civil War, and it's about a young girl that grows up throughout it, and Roma's knowledge and love of the natural world shines through, but there are some brutal bits in the book. And it's a real, there was one moment when I read the book and I had to put it down, I had to walk away, I had to leave it for a few days before I came back to it. But it was wonderful, because actually it was a real insight into what it must have been like during that time, why we can never let things like that ever happen again. And it makes you think about what's happening in the world right now. So please buy the book. I mean, she's a fantastic writer with more in the pipeline. So I really, big fan, as you can see. But we've sort of come to a close on what we have to say, but we've got a couple of people that we'd love to give some space to talk that asked to speak today, who are Conduit members, and just going back to these ideas about the safari providers and working in countries that have narratives that we're fed that aren't necessarily the truth of what's going on. But I'd like to start with Julian. Julian Asher here has an amazing company, but also runs photography safari tours to Africa. Julian, do you want to just say a few words talking about the beading, but with that piece of news today about the Ritz-Carlton in Kenya, do you have a take on that?
So I think you saw my take on it.
But not everyone here is a member of the community, so.
So basically, like the construction of that particular lodge has been very controversial in Kenya and in the safari industry, because frankly there are too many lodges and too many camps in the Masai Mara already, and they just keep approving more. And yes, to a certain extent, it is, it's the big brands trying to muscle in on what has been traditionally the provenance of sort of, small family-owned camps, where like, one family might have 2 camps or something, whereas now Marriott and their fellow big brands want to get in on the action. The other problem there is that the incentives that are structured in such a way where the local county council gets most of its income from bet night fees. So their incentive is to approve more and more bet nights. And that's a lot of what's driving the continued expansion. So that business model itself needs to change, to remove the incentive to just keep building, of which right now there is unfortunately a substantial amount. So I guess just a bit of background. I'm the founder and owner of Timeless Africa, Timeless Asia, Timeless Latin America, and Timeless Antarctica. We're a triple bottom line company, and we focus on regenerative travel, predominantly wilderness focused travel to selected destinations in each of those regions. And fortunately, I can verify that neither leopards nor lions jump on vehicles. It's cheetahs, which, while that's bad, at least they're not likely to kill you. But one of the things you asked me to speak about was what happens when people want to bring home a memento of their trip, and how do we go about doing that in a responsible way? I mean, you sort of think about, where does the word souvenir come from? It comes from se souvenir, which is the French for to remember. So the reason people buy souvenirs is because they want a physical memory of that particular place. So we just sort of think, okay, if I do want to do that, how do I do it in a way that ensures that I contribute positively to that place and not to a big factory in China? Well, one way is to go to a place where things are made, where you can see the people making the things that you're buying. Therefore, you know that it's coming from them, as opposed to a factory in China. The other thing to do is, I've got a few examples here, is look for things which are not only made at a place, but things that you'll use when you bring them home.
Do you want to stand up, Julian, so people can see?
Yeah. So we've got a few things here. These are made from recycled telephone wire. They're from South Africa. They're actually from a group of safari lodges called Singita. And what's interesting is that these are traditional designs, but the colors were chosen by one of Singita's designers to work in a more contemporary environment. So I can take these to my mid-century modern flat, where some of the more traditional color schemes probably wouldn't work that well, and I can use them, and I use them every day. Another thing is to turn buying a souvenir to something more than just a transaction. This badge I had made for me in Rwanda. I went to a market, and I looked around, and I chose this particular pattern because I thought it was nice. And I explained, I sort of sketched out what I wanted, bought my cloth, and the people from the stall that I bought the cloth from walked me over to a row of tailors and to their partner. Each of the different cloth stalls had a partner, And they literally made the bags for me. I got 4 of them made. It took 45 minutes and probably cost me about $10. But this is something that you can't buy in a store. It is literally, there are 4 of them, and that is the only 4 that exist. Because it's something that, it wasn't just the buying of it was the experience of sitting with the ladies while they were making the bags and chatting with them and talking about, what's the most interesting thing you've ever made for someone? What's the most outrageous request you ever got? If I had more time, I would have tried to make a shirt or something, but I literally was going to the airport that evening, so I had 45 minutes. So I figured, okay, a bag is fairly simple. The other thing that I brought is a tapestry that I brought from a workshop in Egypt, a little bit outside Cairo. And again, it's signed by the people who made it on the back. And the thing about all of these objects is that they all have a story. They're not just, I went into a shop and dropped $20. They all have a story that I sat there and I watched the people weave these tapestries. Not this specific one, because it takes quite a long time to make something like this, but I got to see them making similar tapestries. I got the bag made, in Rwanda, and I can, it's not just, again, I didn't just go into a shop and buy it. And I think that's, when you buy something, you should think, okay, am I going to use this thing when I get home? Is it going to remain part of my life, or is it going to end up in a landfill? And then also, if I'm going to buy something that I want to remind me of that country, make sure it's something that's actually made in that country. And a lot of that is connecting with makers and designers and seeking those people out rather than just ducking into a shop. Fortunately, sometimes you can get lucky. This is actually from the Singida shop. One of the challenges on safari is that, you kind of, you're in your lodge. It's not actually easy to go out and leave your lodge, given that the big 5 are running around outside. So that does mean that, your shopping opportunities are somewhat limited. But that's why choosing where you stay is an important part of that. So a place like Kalukanda House, a place like Singida, if you buy something from the shop there, I don't actually know Kalukanda House is a shop, but if you buy something from the shop there, you hope that it's been responsibly sourced. And it's hard to do your due diligence on the place where you're staying and saying okay, are they engaging with the local community? Is all of the stuff in the lodge, the decor, the rugs, the art, even things like the ceramic plates, is it made in the country? Is it made locally? And then if you buy something in the shop, is that made locally too? And think about, the great thing about these things is that they combine that local design with something that works in a contemporary environment. So it's not like I'm going to buy a basket, which I'm going to take home, that doesn't fit in my flat. And then after a certain point, I'm going to go, okay, what am I going to do with this thing? Whereas these work. There's something that fits into my life, and therefore I sort of hang on to them.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks, Julian. Would also love to invite Tinu to share a few words as well. Do you want to talk about your Dominican Republic?
I could.
Yes.
There's a few things that
Oh, unless. Oh, yeah, go.
that sort of struck.
Go.
Your compass, I completely agree. Just for some context, I've spent 22 years in travel and tourism on the glossy side of helping large hotel brands market themselves. So chances are you might have interacted with some of the content we've created, traveling, booking, see billboards or anything like that.
Not the Ritz-Carlton in the Masai Mara.
Get him.
Here my intention is mortgage, and I believe travel and tourism has responsibility to the local communities that they operate in. It's been largely exploited industry for a large part, while they're still providing employment and creating an economy for a lot of places. They still are the highest consumers of water-powered telecommunications, which is driving a lot of the employees further away from where they work, making their lives more difficult. So turning my attention inward, now we're telling stories about the community. And the pillars or the compass that you illustrate, I think it's really important for travelers to be aware of it. Curiosity is extremely important, but the humanity and the kindness, because when you're traveling, whether you're at a resort or you're staying at a lodge or anything, you're dealing with another human being. And at the end of the day, we're all human beings. So if you can relate to that person or be curious about them and try and understand their world a little bit better, that makes a huge difference in pushing things a little bit further. And as far as the storytelling goes, right now we're creating stories for employees to understand micro interventions that might be going on to see how that impacts their community. Now, I live in Vancouver, Canada, and who am I to be telling some local community about what's best for them? So it's really important to co-create and talk to the locals and understand their point of view. And in that co-creation process, the most beautiful stories come out. Recently, we did a story in Puerto Vallarta about seagulls. Now, nothing, groundbreaking or anything like that. There is a beach. It's actually just part of a cove. It's at the Hyatt Ziva, Puerto Vallarta. They don't really publicize it too much, but there's a lot of tourists that come there during nesting season. And on their beach, because it's not a cove, it's not a triangular beach, turtles come lay their eggs, and there's a gentleman there who was moved as a kid because he saw some atrocities to turtles, that he dedicated his life to being conservationist. Not a formal education, learned along the way. And every morning, when they're laying their eggs, he gets out there, his name is Miguel, and he goes and gathers the eggs, counts them, and they've got a little sanctuary at the side. Now, that story could be exploited so that, come see the sea turtles, watch them hatch, do all these kinds of things. The property actually got to create. And we did a story about Miguel and not the sea turtles, about his passion and why it's important in some of those kinds of things. So when you co-create, telling stories through the lens of some of the locals, see what's important to them. They're not necessarily looking for someone to come and save them. But at the same time, it's about respect and actually having empathy and understanding for other places, cultures, nature, biodiversity, and what's important generationally, what's been important culturally, as well as now bringing in all the knowledge that we have to help build a better future in different ways. So when you're making a travel decision, not everybody's going to want the same thing. I've got a week off, I want to go lie in the sun, I want to have drinks, and you know what? I could pretend I had a cultural experience by getting from the airport to a transfer through the walled gates of a resort, watching some local show that's been put together by the same people that are running the pool, up aerobics in the morning, and then get back on cell, go home and say I had a wonderful cultural experience. That's for you? Sure, there's a place to that. People, and we do have different forms of storytelling in different mediums. And so the kind of things that you're doing wrong, and the kinds of things you're doing and not blowing smoke, and the kinds of things that Julian's working on, these are really important, and it allows us to make meaningful decisions. And I understand that's what the topic is here, so with that, I'll zip up. But I'm a super passionate traveler. I love to see the world, but I love to hear through other people's works and see through other lenses, because that helps create my souvenirs. And those souvenirs, that's about to tick boxes, whatever it means, to each their own. But anyways, that's what I have to say.
Thank you. So, but just to clarify, what you're doing is you're sharing the stories of the employees in these big hotels.
Yes.
And so what you're doing is, I don't think that was quite clear, is actually you're turning the lens on who the people are within these communities that are coming into these big hotels. And I think that's a really important point to be aware of.
That's right. Currently, I'm telling stories about the employees, for the employees, by the employees, so they can see what kinds of interventions are going on. And I'm happy to say these little stories that we are creating belonging to UN SDGs, belonging to ESG goals, so that we're ticking some of the boxes with some of the funders of some of these stories. But more than anything, that these stories are actually starting to create change with communities. And it is by the community. It's just building awareness, not more than anything. So eventually we'll turn them to consumer facing as well. But that's about it. Yeah.
That's brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Fantastic, yeah. All right.
Got time for one more question. if there's any.
Has anyone got any questions?
Oh, I'm also really loud. So.
we are going to pop up to the Ubuntu afterwards as well. So
My question, I would like to think I'm generally a pretty optimistic person, but I'm admittedly going to ask a question about something that I currently have quite pessimistic opinion about, but the purpose of the question is to be more hopeful. The question is around the places, for example, that I feel have already been massively over-touristed. The Venices, the Florences, the Santorinis, the Balis, like places that, quite frankly, it's hard for me not to use the words ruined, right? You like a metaphor, you know I love a metaphor. See the Matrix, sometimes it is tempting to believe that humans are more of a virus than male in the way we move in, like just massively over-consume resources at a place. When you want to see the world, and you want to see some of these places that you already feel like we're a couple centuries into it being overdone. Sorry, I feel like I really put too fine a point on the pessimistic part. So maybe this is where I'll turn it over to you and say, for these places, like what are the signs, I'm sure there are, to feel more hopeful about these places that are starting to wake up? Like, by the way, I just absolutely adore this work I'm thinking in Barcelona, and that was just one of the most amazing. Does everyone know about this? So Barcelona facing massive amounts of tourism. Their locals decided to just show up as super tourist cafes with squirt guns and just squirt them with water pistols, like a very peaceful protest, which I thought was just an amazing way to show the mess. And now I'm rambling. So how can we be hopeful about places that are over touristed?
You go first.
Well, I mean, I think, like, for example, you mentioned places like Florence and beautiful cities that, like, a lot of people would love to see, but maybe it's about priorities, about the time of year that you visit, like about going at, off-peak seasons. You don't have to rush there in the summer when everyone else does, and, staying slightly further out maybe and doing like a train journey in to view these places, trying to do it in a way that's going to minimize adding to the chaos and the ruin. But I mean, I've always been a little bit of an off the beaten track person, so I tend to kind of not want to go to those really hyper busy places. I'd rather kind of explore maybe a place nearby. And there's so many beautiful places. Like if you want to go to Europe, like Slovenia, Montenegro, there are so many other places that you can visit around there. So I think kind of spreading that tourism out, really think about why are you going there? Like, is it just to go and see those fundamental shots that you've seen all over the internet and Instagram, or is there something meaningful that you're looking for? Because if you want to go on a delicious food tour, go to Bologna. I was there recently and there's amazing food there. And, I think it doesn't get as much tourism because everyone just flocks to the Rome and the Florence, but there's so much to see there. So I think it's just thinking about the motivations of why you're going is a key thing. But I'm generally a pretty hopeful person. So I feel like even us having this discussion, the number of people are asking these questions is a sign that we're kind of reflecting and thinking about these things, and then likely to spread the word and bring up the other areas too. There's a lot of us and there's a lot of places to go.
Yeah, I agree. I think also, as we were talking earlier, if you really, really, really want to go to a place like Santorini, when there are so many I've got to tell you a story about Santorini. Back in I'll really show my age here. 1989, I went interrailing, and I was a student and not very rich, obviously. And I was on a boat to go to another island. I can't remember where it was, and we overslept because probably we were hungover, and woke up on this little island called Santorini. Totally undiscovered. No one was there. The water was crystal clear. I can't ever go back there until somehow, because it's been ruined in my mind as well. But that was an accident, because actually wherever we were going to, and as I said, I can't even remember that island's name, was the place to go. And so we accidentally ended up in, and the point being that there are so many places nearby. You were talking about Yala Safari in Sri Lanka. There are so many safaris in Sri Lanka that no one hears about because it's not in our travel pages. So the hopeful piece is for us as travellers to demand better, to take the responsibility ourselves a little bit, to lift the bonnet, search, go to places nearby and start to scatter ourselves and come back with these stories, buy local, everything that we've been talking about. Glass half full.
I
think we might have to leave it there. But yes, thank you so much to everyone, and thank you very much to Dee and Roma. As I say, please do head upstairs to the Ubuntu Lounge to continue the conversation. Make sure you go via our friends at Stanford's to buy Roma's book and get it signed on the way. But for now, please join me in giving a very big round of applause to Dee. Thank you.